the important thing to understand is that hormones take cues from what we eat, how we live, and that's why lifestyle is so important. And the whole process of the perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause is very individual. But absolutely, there are some fundamental frameworks that we could do to make a smoother transition. So, within all of this, what I'm passionate about equipping women with is this idea of a toolkit or a toolbox to make sure that their individual journey, they feel supported to know what works for them. Because as you rightly said, the way that we experience this journey is going to be so individual.
I'm Shreya Parekh, and you're listening to Empower Her, the podcast for busy women aged 35 and beyond. If you're feeling stuck and unfulfilled with your health and wealth, get ready to be empowered to take action. My guests and I will be providing you with knowledge, resources, and ideas to help you broaden your perspectives, learn more about yourself, and define your path to live your absolute best life. Be sure to hit that follow button to stay tuned with Empower Her and check out the valuable free resources available on the website to support your journey. In our busy lives, nutrition often takes a backseat, but for women in perimenopause and postmenopause, it's crucial to focus on what fuels their bodies. Join me with Dr. Linia Patel, a leading dietitian and performance nutritionist, as she helps women understand the powerful connection between body function and optimal health. With degrees in biochemistry, physiology, nutrition, dietetics, and sports nutrition, plus a PhD in public health and epidemiology, Dr. Patel is highly qualified. Linia has also been frequently quoted in the national press and has appeared on the BBC, ITV and Channel 5. Get ready for amazing insights to start your journey to a healthier you. Linia, welcome to the Empower Her podcast. It's great to have you on. I'm excited to talk about all the great things we're going to talk about focused on nutrition. Please could you introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your journey from what you were doing to what you're doing now? That would be great. Thanks so much.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Shreya. It's a pleasure and an honor to be on the podcast. So, my name is Linia, and I work as a women's health dietitian, a performance nutritionist, and a public health researcher. So I do wear a couple of hats. And so in terms of my journey, I trained initially as a dietitian with a speciality in sports nutrition or performance nutrition. And that's actually where it was in that role that my interest in women's health was born. And so clinically now I work a lot with women, particularly women who are working in the city, who are juggling the pressures of a job and at the same time of just physically active and just adulting. And then I'm also very passionate about public health, and I always have been. And so I have a PhD in public health because I love the idea that actually how you eat plays a massive role in prevention of disease and also determines how ultimately you age, and the fact that public health is about having an impact on a wider level. So I spend some of my time also doing research in public health as well.
That's fantastic. Lots of hats there, but lots of very, very important hats, that's for sure. Yeah. So, I want to delve into nutrition because I feel like, we all, I shouldn't use the word all, but a lot of people are very, very busy, and nutrition and exercise, fitness, two of the things that kind of go to the wayside because we're running around doing lots of different things, working, tending to care, having caring responsibilities if we have those and things like that. So generally, when we're talking about women, do women need to, first of all, think about their nutrition and what they're putting into their bodies differently to men? Is there a difference there? And if there is, what is that? And does it depend on your age as well?
Fantastic question, Freya, and you've touched on a number of things. And so I suppose the first question is absolutely women need to think of themselves being different to men. We're not just, little men with ovaries and breasts. Our physiology is very, very different. And for a long time, science has neglected giving women-specific advice. So the world we live in is very kind of male-centric. And the reason that has been is because actually studying women is complicated, because if you think of the reproductive years of a woman. It can be delineated into a number of different stages. So you have menstruation, and then from menstruation, you have your reproductive years. And actually, within a menstrual cycle, Shreya, our hormone levels today are going to be different to what they were yesterday, are going to be different to what we're going to be like tomorrow. So for a scientist trying to control for that sometimes becomes a challenge. And then within that reproductive years, you can have perhaps fertility issues, you can be suffering with polycystic ovaries, endometriosis, you might be trying to get pregnant, you might be breastfeeding. So there's all these factors that, you need to think about. Then when you kind of get to your late 30s, early 40s, is the stage in life that I'm very kind of passionate about and I work a lot in, which is called the perimenopause and the menopause, where you have a natural decrease in the two main female hormones, or three main female hormones, which are estrogen, progesterone, and also testosterone as well. And that has an impact, as we're going to talk about later on in this podcast, on a whole host of things. So we also need to think about, how are we eating when our hormones are having these massive fluctuations? And then menopause is actually only one day. And menopause is after you've not had a menstrual cycle for more than 12 months and a day. And then life after the menopause is called post-menopause. So actually, as women, we need to be thinking rightly, as you said, where am I in all these stages? And where you are absolutely will determine what your priorities are in terms of your health, but also in what your priorities are in terms of how you need to be fueling yourself.
Yeah. So I guess a woman in her 20s and 30s and 40s and beyond, would you say that what you fuel your body with is going to be different generally? I mean, I know, of course, there's the obvious things that you should be fueling your body with, but
yeah,
with those stages, would you say it's quite different and you should look at it quite differently?
Exactly. And I think, fundamentally, Shreya, you have the building blocks of nutrition, so we all, at any stage of our lives, need to be eating a healthy, balanced, varied diet. And so that means, getting the right type of carbohydrates on there, making sure we're eating enough protein, lots of fruit and vegetables, and also eating enough fat. But how does that differ throughout the life stage? Well, perhaps in your 20s and 30s, your metabolism is higher because your hormones are on a higher level. So perhaps you don't necessarily, your body is more forgiving of perhaps getting away with poor eating habits. But what I'm being a public health nutritionist and having preventative care kind of running through my blood, I'm very much around the fact that actually, when we hit the stage called the perimenopause, which is late 30s, early 40s, the science shows that how we eat, how we live, the lifestyles we have, whether we have a good kind of sleep habit is really, really important for determining how then we go through this transition when our hormones are fluctuating. So it's not about saying, hey, you're lucky in your 20s and 30s, you can get away with not necessarily eating well because, you might not necessarily feel the effects on your energy levels or on your weight. But actually, it's really important to get into those habits earlier on because it just means that as physiologically things do become harder in your, late 30s, early 40s, which is the reality, actually, you've got those habits in place so that as you're going through it, then the transition is just going to be easier. It's going to be an easier course for you. What I see, once you are in this hormone flux, what happens there, we'll talk about it later, but basically every single part of your body is affected from your cognitive function. I get a lot of clients coming to me saying just things like, Linia, just something has changed. I say that I work with a lot of clients in the city. It could be they're not able to focus as much. Their energy levels are much poorer. Perhaps, they're forgetting a lot of their work. They're used to being high performers, but they just can't keep that. They feel that they cannot keep up with the pace that they used to be able to do. And these are women who are able to juggle and do so well in juggling, but they're just no longer able to keep up with it. And then they start becoming overwhelmed, really, really anxious. And then, they're eating exactly the same diet, doing exactly the same movement, but they're gaining weight. So small things like that, which add up actually, where women start experiencing like something is changing. And so in your late 30s and early 40s, then, the balance of nutrients is really important, but you need to probably prioritize protein at every meal. You also need to make sure that you're eating more fiber. It's a huge one. So that, comes in, what did I have for my breakfast this morning? Things like your whole oats or your muesli, rather than perhaps having your sugary cereals. If you're going for breads, you're going for more seeded bread, sourdough bread, or something a little bit with what we call a lower glycemic index, which means that when you eat it, it doesn't push your blood sugar levels up so quickly.
Yeah. So I guess it's a case of, yes, think about what you're putting inside you in your 20s and 30s as well, because it will lead up to and really help you out when you start those, when those changes start happening with your, going through perimenopause and of course, post-menopause as well. What kind of foods would you say that women should really be thinking about eating during the perimenopause phase? And I'm assuming it might be a bit different post-menopause as well.
Yeah, and I think probably sure it would be useful if we kind of chat a little bit around definitions, because the other
Yeah.
day I was chatting to some of my friends on the weekend, and these are friends who work in the fitness industry, and I couldn't believe that actually they just didn't even understand the fact that the menopause is only one day.
Yeah.
So maybe let's start with a definition of the menopause, which I've already given, which is it's literally one day in your life where you haven't had a menstrual cycle for more than 12 months consecutively and a day. The debate is out there in terms of the fact that this definition is too linked with menstrual cycle, and there's actually women who don't experience a menstrual cycle. So actually, we're already looking at the fact that definition is perhaps not the best one. But anyway, we've got the menopause, which is one day. But what people forget is the perimenopause. So peri is a Greek word which means around. So peri is basically can be 7 to 10 years before the menopause already happens. And that's why I'm so passionate about getting my 38-year-olds eating and living right, because as they enter into this perimenopause, that's really important that they make sure that they are getting the right things on their plate, they're eating an anti-inflammatory diet, eating for their gut health, they're making sure that they're exercising and doing strength training, sleeping, etc., because that means that as they go through this hormonal flux, which is exactly what the perimenopause is, it's this massive roller coaster of hormones, which then has an impact on so many symptoms. There's 34 symptoms of the perimenopause, but if not more. And so, yes, so that's the perimenopause. And then post-menopause is basically after the menopause, where you've got low estrogen now, low progesterone, and your risk of a lot of chronic diseases like heart disease, or one that's very, very close to my heart because my mother suffered with dementia from her mid-50s, is your brain health is completely affected. So it's really important that actually post-menopause, it's around reducing your risk of a lot of the chronic diseases that are brought about because you're now in a state of these lower hormones.
Yeah, that is really important. To be fair, only in the last few years, not even that actually, in the last year or so, I realized that this word menopause that I keep hearing about in social media everywhere, it's just one day.
Yeah.
And that is really, I feel like, correct me if I'm wrong, quite insignificant compared to perimenopause and postmenopause, because they're the most important things that we need to be talking about, and they're the words that we should be really using
exactly,
more openly, because that's when we're feeling all sorts of things, and all sorts of things are going through our going on with our body. So take me through those phases then in terms of nutrition, because we've talked about what the phases are, but in terms of nutrition, you talked there are so many symptoms associated with perimenopause. So what kind of foods? And I know obviously everyone's different, all our bodies are different, even when it comes down to your ethnicity and things like that. So I know now that being South Asian And, you know, a lot of black women as well, we could experience perimenopause a lot earlier than white women, you know, all these things.
And worse symptoms as well. Yeah.
Exactly. So yes, I know there's not one size fits all, absolutely not, and it's not a copy and paste for everyone. But generally speaking, you know, what should we be thinking about in terms of our nutrition during the perimenopause phase and then the postmenopause? Because then there's other issues that we really need to address there as well.
Yeah, and a fantastic question. And I think you've hit on a really important one that I want to emphasize as well, is that, you know, throughout this whole phase, and even when we're in our 20s and 30s, the important thing to understand is that hormones take cues from what we eat, how we live, and that's why lifestyle is so important. And the whole process of the perimenopause, menopause, and postmenopause is very individual. But absolutely, there's some fundamental frameworks that we could do to make a smoother transition. So, you know, within all of this, what I'm passionate about equipping women with is this idea of a toolkit or a toolbox to make sure that their individual journey, they feel supported to know what works for them. Because as you rightly said, the way that we experience this journey is going to be so individual. So what works for you, Shreya, is not going to exactly work for me. So what my role is as a clinician is to provide women with tools in their kit so that they can pull things out. So perhaps, you know, I've got a book coming out, which is called Food for the Menopause, which I'm so excited about. And I've literally been writing this book for almost 7 years, because the idea I had for this book came about because I was working in the city and working with, you know, lots of female leaders who at that point in their careers were really leaning into, you know, positions of leadership. At the same time, they were going through this perimenopause and menopause phase. And so, you know, when I would see them in consultation or in clinic, I would then want to give them something else to read up or to refer to. And there was just no information out there for them. And so I kind of thought, my goodness, there's such a massive gap in the market. And so the whole idea started back then in terms of providing women with this toolkit. So if I go back to my book, so within my book, you know, I talk about the ideas that the book is split into 3 chapters, you know, eating for success, living for success, and recipes for success. And the reason I've done it like that is because, you know, very beginning, Shreya, when we were chatting, I talked to you and I said that I'm a sports nutritionist and a performance nutritionist. And that comes in because my job as a sports nutritionist is helping someone be the best version of themselves, whether they are a sporting athlete, whether they are a professional working in a consultancy firm or a law firm. And the idea within, you know, sports medicine, which is where my sports nutrition work comes from, is that it has to be a multidisciplinary team. We have to look at an individual in a 360-degree way. And so within the book, for me, that's my ethos of the way that I practice. And I really wanted to bring that in there. So you can eat the best diet in the world, but if you are not spending enough time in bed, if you are not managing your stress in a healthy and productive way, then, you know, the food that I'm giving you is still going to has going to have a positive impact, but not to the same level. So if I just focus on nutrition, so within my book, so the chapter when I'm talking about eating for success, what do I talk about? Well, the first one sounds really simple, but I promise you people do not get it right, and it's hydration. Are you well hydrated? You know, I find a lot of people actually go through life slightly mildly dehydrated. And how do you know you're mildly dehydrated? Well, you actually start feeling a little bit when you are thirsty, you are mildly dehydrated. And because our brain is, you know, 70 to 80% water, if we are mildly dehydrated, we are not thinking as clearly, as sharply, remembering things. Our mood is not the same. Now, some of those symptoms might feel exactly the same as some of the symptoms of the hormonal roller coaster that is the perimenopause.
Yeah.
You know, so making sure you're hydrated and hydrating earlier on in the day is really important. So there's no point being dehydrated all day, then coming home and then glugging like 2 pints of liquid, you know, when you walk into the house, and then, you know, or after dinner and then being up all night peeing because you've drunk your water too late. So hydration is really important. Sounds simple, but it's one that people need to get right and build a consistent habit around. Then the other 3 things I like focusing on is eating for blood sugars. And so when you eat for blood sugars, what do I mean by that? Well, eating in a way that is balanced. So that means that on your plate, you've got some carbohydrate. Now, most people tend to think of, if I'm eating for my blood sugar levels, I need to go low carb. But actually, when you are going through this menopause transition, going low carb is not the solution. It's about making sure you get smart with your carbohydrate intake. So, maybe I'll turn this on to you, Shreya, and ask you, what did you have for breakfast today, if you have had breakfast?
I haven't really had breakfast, to be honest. I had a black coffee,
Okay.
no sugar, no milk, and I've had a handful of walnuts so far.
Okay. So what you've had there is some healthy fats, which are really
Yeah,
important, but you haven't had the whole grain carbohydrate and you haven't had the protein. So
no,
actually, in terms of your blood sugar levels, they're perhaps, they're starting off not necessarily bad, but they're not starting off optimally.
yeah,
And so, it's about making sure that we're eating in a balanced way, getting the carbohydrates right. So swapping from what we call refined carbohydrate, where you get your white bread, your white rice, your cakes and biscuits and your sugary cereals, to something that is more whole food, more whole grain. And so that's one thing. And then making sure we get protein with every single meal. What I tend to find is that most of my clients rush out the door, probably maybe just having some toast with some jam or some marmalade on it. And so what that is, just carbohydrates, it's no protein. So most women actually start their day with low protein, which then has an impact on their blood sugar control, which means their concentration, their weight, their cravings later on, their muscle mass, which becomes an issue. And so really eating for your blood sugars is important. So that starts earlier on in the day and making sure that every single meal is nice and balanced. And so that's a real focus in my book, is that all the recipes, I've got 80 recipes in there, and each one is balanced and in a way that you've got the right amount of carbohydrates and proteins, some good fats, and loads of vegetables and fruit. Then the other two pillars that are really important, one is anti-inflammatory eating. Now, what is fascinating, Shreya, is when we look at women going through the perimenopause and we take blood samples and we look at inflammatory markers on a blood level, women through the perimenopause have higher inflammatory markers than women in their early 30s who are not in the perimenopause. And so women who are more or have more inflammation are more at risk of having exacerbated symptoms that are already feeling, like the brain fog, like the weight gain, like the poor blood sugar control. But it also means that most diseases of lifestyle start from inflammation, so your risk of diseases later on in life is also going to be increased. So making sure you're eating in an anti-inflammatory way is really important. Now, that's not about, just taking a turmeric shot. Lots of people hear that, turmeric is really anti-inflammatory, and there are properties of turmeric, in the curcuma, which is the active ingredient, that are known to have anti-inflammatory effects. But it's about the eating pattern. And so one of the diets that is touted to be one of the most anti-inflammatory diets out there is a Mediterranean diet. And, I did my PhD in Italy, and I've spent 6 years living in Italy. So I have firsthand experience of exactly what the Mediterranean diet is. So within the book, I really bring in the idea of Mediterranean eating as well. But at the same time, anti-inflammatory eating is basically a healthy eating pattern that's based on whole foods. It also has lots of herbs and spices. I'm half Indian, so my mom had a Zambian Indian restaurant growing up, so I grew up with herbs and spices in our cooking. So a lot of those are really, really important in terms of bringing them into our day-to-day nutrition. So that's another way that we can make sure we're reducing our inflammation. And then the last one is eating for your gut bacteria. Now, within our intestine, we have a whole world of bacteria that basically determine our hormone levels, our metabolism, our appetite, our mood, and our health, and so much more. They basically run our bodies. And again, when we look at the science, there was a Zoe study done where they were looking at the changes in the gut bacteria as a woman goes through from her perimenopause to during perimenopause and postmenopause. And they found that as she goes through that transition, her gut bacteria becomes more like a man's. So it becomes less varied as she's going through that, which is why when we go through postmenopause, we have the same risk factors in terms of heart disease that a man would. And so it's really important that as women, naturally, actually, we have a more diverse microbiota or gut bacteria, which is a real strength because we're still learning about this idea of gut health. But one thing we do know as scientists is that the more varied your gut bacteria, the healthier you are. So the fact that actually this hormonal flux is reducing the amount of variation you have in your gut is not a good thing. And so I focus a lot on ensuring that women eat in a way that nurtures your gut bacteria. So that's, less refined sugar, so less added sugar, less artificial sweeteners, more of your colorful fruit and vegetables, more fiber, less alcohol. I'll talk about alcohol a little bit later on, etc. Just to make sure we're nurturing that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You know what? I actually did the Zoe study. I took part in that, and I was shocked that my gut bacteria, I mean, I'm going through the perimenopause phase, and I was shocked with my gut bacteria. It was not what I thought it was. I thought it was going to be amazing because, I eat nuts, I love plants and, as in like vegetables and things like that. And what I realized is, and I know we're going to come onto this later, I think my gut bacteria wasn't great because of the alcohol.
Interesting.
That's my conclusion, and I only came to that conclusion a few weeks ago because I was just thinking, why is my gut bacteria so bad? Why is it so bad? And and that's what I've linked it to. I know we're going to talk about that a bit later, but I know I'm not going to go through and ask you about what kinds of foods, because it's all in your book. And I think people should definitely read your book. I think it's great. And the recipes are all in there as well. And I didn't think about the importance of having protein in the morning. I always leave protein to the end of the day.
No,
I've not thought about the fact that actually it needs to be in your breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
100%. Sure. If I just interrupt you there, one of the main things that women would come to see me about, there's lots in terms of energy levels and the mental aspect, but also weight. Weight is another big one. And I know that weight is a sensitive topic for many people. But it's a topic that actually people come to see me about. And one of the things that happens as we go through the perimenopause is because we've got less estrogen, less testosterone, we lose muscle mass naturally because we're aging, exacerbated because we have less estrogen. Now, one thing we do not want to lose as we get older is muscle mass, because muscle mass, number one, is metabolically more active. The more muscle mass you have, the higher your metabolic rate. But also, the more muscle mass we have, the healthier we age. So we call it, functional capacity. So the fact that actually, as you go through your 60s, 70s, and 80s, you'll be the older person who will be able to ride their bike, walk up the stairs, get up from the sofa. And so that is all determined with muscle mass. And so muscle mass, ensuring you have good muscle mass, is 50 nutrition, 50 movement. So the nutrition is the protein. You have to because muscle is protein. So you have to make sure that you've got what we call an amino acid pool, which is basically the building blocks of that muscle, available in your body at all times. Otherwise, you will chip away at that muscle mass. And so this is why you just having your protein in the evening, not good enough. You need to make sure that you're having it spread out throughout the day, so you always have that amino acid pool so your body can tap into it, is really important. But then the other part of it is you need to eat enough protein, but you also need to be doing weight-based resistance exercise, particularly in your perimenopause years, so that's kind of either using your body weight or using some weights or using a weighted vest or something that just adds that resistance to make sure that your muscles are getting stimulated so that actually you keep them around as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think in your book, have you kind of, I guess your recipes for the breakfast, lunch and evening meals, of course it is going to be, I'm assuming, balanced to, with the protein and the carbs.
100%. Exactly.
Every kind of need.
Yeah, so I've really focused on that, because ultimately this is a resource that I, have been creating for a long time, but this is also what I do with the clients that I see all the time in the city. And so for breakfast, in the chapter before I go into the recipes, I talk about the fact that, the problem I tend to see is that women are low in protein. So I've really emphasized that these are the, I wanted to make all the recipes really quick and accessible, because who's got, an hour to make homemade sourdough bread from scratch on a Monday? No one does. I don't. I definitely don't. And, so I made sure that actually the recipes during the week are super quick, super accessible, and delicious as well. But then during the weekend, then when you have a little bit more time, you can perhaps, spend some time making some kind of more indulgent, but still very, very balanced recipes as well. Yeah.
No, that's great. Are there any food groups or types of food and liquids that can make your symptoms worse when you're going through perimenopause and even the post-menopause phase?
Yeah, and this is not around demonizing any foods, because it's all about context. But it's definitely what I want to do with this is make women aware of the fact that there are absolutely some foods that make your symptoms worse, or perhaps make the journey harder. And so it's about understanding, and goes back to the idea of this toolkit, is understanding within your toolkit what works for you as an individual with what your pain points are. So the ones I'd probably focus on would be sugar. We've talked a little bit about that, added sugar. And if you're just eating things like, biscuits and cakes, then it is going to have an impact on your blood sugar levels, and that will, all symptoms. There's not a single symptom out there which is not exacerbated if you have poor blood sugar control. So it's really important that it's not about banning and not having anything with added sugar, because you know what? In my recipe book, I've got, in the weekend section, I've got recipes which, are cakes. But, as a dietitian, I'm always ultimately looking for ways to make everything that I eat as nutritious as possible. But this is also about this idea that it's about a balance. If I go back to the Mediterranean diet and the fact that I live in Milan, is that, they do this idea of balance very well. So perhaps they're eating, healthy and balanced 80% of the time, but 20% of the time they are, eating their gelatos and they're having their long lunches, which are indulgent, but they got that balance right as well. So sugar, keeping that in check, absolutely. And I'm more fussed around your habitual habits than the fact that, every now and again you go out and have the most amazing and delicious cupcake.
Yeah.
Then the other two would be alcohol and caffeine. And so let me just stop and talk a little bit about alcohol, which again can become a little bit of a sensitive topic for some people. But, the reality is alcohol and the perimenopause and postmenopause are not the best combination. And that's because, alcohol firstly annihilates your sleep. I'm in my 40s as well. And I know that if I go out and drink a couple glasses of wine, I'm basically surrendering my sleep quality that evening, because it literally does affect your sleep. Even though you think, it makes me feel drowsy and sleepy, but actually what happens is the quality of your sleep is no longer good. It impacts digestive issues. You kind of pull that up when you were talking about the fact that, even though you thought you eat well, your gut bacteria perhaps is not optimum. That might be a number of different factors also.
Yeah.
But alcohol is definitely one of them. It has an impact on mood. It has an impact on brain fog. Weight is a massive one, So I would be saying within alcohol is really, really to stick to your 14 units or less. And I think most, health professionals would be saying, the less you have of alcohol, the better it is going to be, just because even if sometimes a PR machine says red wine is good for us, that's not what the science is showing. So within my recipe book as well, I really wanted to get a section in there about drinks, because sometimes when I'm advising clients and I'm saying I want you to have an alcohol-free period, they're like, well, what am I going to do, stand around with a glass of fizzy water with a lemon? Come on, Linia, that becomes a little bit boring after a time, so I really wanted to put some recipes in there where I was giving women some drinks that were refreshing. I've got like a green tea lemonade in there that also gave them antioxidants, which is something again that's going to nourish their gut bacteria. And then one of my favorite recipes in there is what I call liquid gold, which is pineapple iced tea. I come from a part in a region in Zambia that is famous for having the most amazing and delicious pineapples. And my mum and my grandmother had a big pineapple farm growing up. And, when we would peel the pineapples, she would keep the skin of the pineapples and she would boil the pineapple skin with some turmeric. And what you get is this, what I call liquid gold, the most amazing, nourishing, delicious drink afterwards. So I've got recipes like that, which are bringing in some elements of added nutritional goodness, but are much more interesting than just having your sparkling water with a glass of a slice of
Yeah.
lemon in there.
Yeah, no, I know. Do see, some people when we're out, it's not even the sparkling water, it's Coke after Coke after Coke, because then they're not having the alcohol, which is great, but then it's being supplemented by Coke, and
Yeah. And I guess
it's
with that, is there added sugar or is there artificial sweeteners? And again, if it's the occasional one, no problem. But if it's a habitual one, then, from a gut health point of view, neither of those are actually good choices.
yeah, absolutely. What about smoking? And I guess the new kind of smoking, vaping. It's
Yeah, I mean that's smoking is never going to be good for anything, right? That public health
Yeah.
message has been out there for a long time. So, if there's one thing that you could do for your health, that could help is absolutely is stop smoking. And the vaping, we don't maybe have enough research around it, but it's not going to be it's not going to be positive research when we start getting it. That's for sure. And then I
Yeah.
just mentioned also before, with alcohol, I mentioned caffeine. And caffeine,
Yes.
the fascinating thing with caffeine is such an individual response, because we respond very differently because of our genetic makeup. And so the reason why we take caffeine, I love my coffee, and I have it because, it gives me a good kickstart in the morning. And that's the caffeine kicking in there. Now, if you're somebody who's perhaps struggling with hot flushes, you're also struggling with sleep, then you might want to ease up with your caffeine, or perhaps look at the timing of your caffeine and have your last caffeinated drink by 2 p.m. latest, because caffeine, the half-life of caffeine, which basically means how long it stays around in your body before your body metabolizes it, is about 6 hours. And so you still need to kind of consider that. So having a cup of tea just before you go to bed is not a good idea if you're struggling with your sleep as well.
Yeah. I don't know if you've got any information around this, because I see some people that they'll have caffeine until really late, and they'll sleep. They'll just go to sleep just like this. I mean, that would not work on me at all. But what's that about? I wonder
Yeah, yeah,
sometimes. I just think, how does
sometimes.
that happen?
Yeah, you got a point, and you go to a restaurant and they'll say espresso. You're like, what espresso? It's something at 10 p.m.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
But I think it goes back to that idea of the genetic makeup. We all metabolize caffeine very, very differently, and so I would just say it goes back to you as an individual, Shreya. How are you sleeping? What is your energy like? What is your mood like? And then that will determine, for you in your toolkit, what I would be advising you to do as an individual.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I've realized that more and more now, a lot of these things are really individual, and I've stopped really absorbing all this information that people put out there, do this and you'll become like this, or you'll look like this, or you'll feel like this, because I just think that might not work for me. And a lot of the time it doesn't work for
Yeah.
everyone. It's a few people here and there that it might work for. So yeah, that is my advice. Go and figure out what your body is doing and work on your body, not what everyone else's bodies are doing. I wanted to ask you what your top three tips would be that you'd give to women, that they could take action on, like right now, if they're going through perimenopause, and then the same for post-menopause as well, because I feel like they may be different, and these are things that women can take action on, like right now, fairly quickly. It's not going to take them hours and hours of research information or something to do.
Yeah, well, you queued me up very nicely to answer this question, and because you talked about the fact that it's an individual process. And what I would say, my first tip for whether you're going through the perimenopause or postmenopause, is check in with yourself. And as part of, the first part of the chapter in my book where I talk about understanding yourself, I put in what I call a symptom tracker. So what I recommend is that any woman in her late 30s or early 40s or even postmenopause basically develops a symptom checking in as part of their self-care that they're doing minimum monthly, if not more regularly. And I literally provide that checklist of the things that you need to be thinking about, because you need to know you. You need to know what your normal is. And because what I said to you before was when people come see me, it's very often what's happened is there's subtle changes over time in terms of their energy, their concentration, their weight. And perhaps sometimes they write them off as just, oh, it's life or it's adulting. But actually, it is the hormonal flux that is causing those subtle changes. So, really knowing you, knowing what your normal is, knowing how there's deviations from that normal is really important. So, I've got a symptom tracker in my book, but if you go to the Menopause Charity, they have symptom trackers that you can download that you can also just print out and put it in. I have a journal. I've got a journal and I kind of have a printed out symptom tracker where I'm just checking in with myself to see how I am going from, week to week or month to month in general. So I know where I need to kind of put an intervention in there. So the first one is check in with yourself regularly. The second one is we need to think about what we eat, so that, if I give you my top headlines with that is eat more fiber. In general, whether we're, perimenopause, post-menopause, as a nation, we are not eating enough fiber. And fiber is super important because it actually helps nourish our gut bacteria, which we know are super important in our hormonal control and so much more. But it also indirectly helps us with balancing our blood sugar level, not our blood sugar levels, and also our hormonal levels as well. Get your protein right. Make sure you're eating, some fats, whether that's your walnuts or your flax seeds, or your pumpkin seeds or your oily fish, and then hydration. So, reach out for that bottle of water. Know how much you're drinking throughout the day. It should be 1.5 to 2 liters a day. Get into a habit of doing that. Then don't just think about what you eat. Think about how you live as well. So, what is your movement like? Are you sitting all day? Can you stand some of the day? Can you walk? Are you getting your resistance exercise in there as well? And then living is not just moving, it's about sleeping. Okay. How many hours are you sleeping? Do you wake up feeling rested or not? So think about how much time you're spending in bed. And then the last one, which is so important that I haven't really touched on, but I would love to, is the idea of managing stress. Now, what happens through the perimenopause is because of our hormonal flux, we are physiologically less resilient because we have higher baseline stress levels. So this is why perhaps we are feeling a little bit more overwhelmed, or the fact that we are not able to juggle like we used to before. And add to that we are juggling young children or maybe older children, but at the same time aging parents. We're at the position in our career where we're maybe leaning into leadership positions. There's a lot on the plate. And if physiologically your body is not as resilient as it used to be, we all, us ladies, need to spend time with knowing how to fill our bucket, because we've got lots of things taking resources out of our bucket. So for me, thinking about not just nutrition, but the other pillars of wellness is really, really important as well. And this kind of goes all the way back to the idea that, it's about a toolkit. It's about knowing what tools you have in your toolkit to ensure that, yes, you eat well, but also that you're covering all the other elements of the pillars of wellness as well, in a way that works for you as an individual, given your circumstances, your journey, your symptoms, your lifestyle.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love that advice. I think, for me, a month ago, I realized I can't take on all the stuff that I used to take on. I just can't do it anymore. And it took a lot of realization. And I thought, I need to take a step back and think about all these things that I'm doing, because I can't do them all anymore, all the juggling. And it really is about tuning into what's happening with your body, how you're feeling. But it took me a long time to do that because I was pushing it back. Why can't I do this? I used to be able to do this like this. I can do this. I'm going to do this, but it's that resistance. And I think we need to, as women as well, we need to stop.
Be kind to ourselves, look after ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we really need to do that a lot more, for sure. I'm a really big advocate for collaboration, and I just wanted to ask you what collaboration opportunities you might be looking for right now. I know you have your book that's out, but if there's anything that you're looking to collaborate on, please do share that.
Yeah, well, I mean, I love opportunities like this, Shreya, which is about having conversations to kind of change the narrative around
Yeah.
women's health, and particularly perimenopause and menopause that I'm so passionate about. I want to empower women to be proactive, to support women who are going through it so that they ensure that they're managing their symptoms. But not just that, this is a performance nutritionist coming into me. Um, Manage your symptoms, but not just manage your symptoms. Thrive in this period of your life as well. Continue being the high performer you are by making sure that you got those tools in there. So, collaborations where I can have more conversations, where I can talk more about how we can, together empower women to manage their health and be proactive is what I'm very, very much open to. And then the other aspect is that, I'm passionate around high performance because that's what I work with, so that's not just high performers in sport, but high performers within work. So we know that 8 in 10 women who are working are perimenopausal or menopause or postmenopausal, and yet 75% of us will experience symptoms of this perimenopause. So and I know that 1 in 5, I think, was the last statistic, leave work because of menopause symptoms. So there is a lot of work that still needs to be done within menopause conversations and the workplace. So I suppose I'll be very open to kind of collaborations in terms of looking at how we can support women to make sure that they're supported by employers, but also to make sure that, as a clinician, I'm supporting individuals who are high performers, who are leaning into positions of leadership to make sure that they continue to be the high performing self, even as they go through this transition, which actually is, when their body is needing the most support.
That's great. Thank you. Linia, thank you so much for being on the Empower Her podcast. It's been amazing to have you on. So much information there. Great advice. It's been brilliant. I hope to have you on again to talk a lot more. There's so much we can talk about. So yeah, I do hope I can have you on again.
Thank you so much for having me on, and I love the work that you're doing empowering women.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thanks for tuning in to Empower Her. I hope today's episode has left you feeling inspired and motivated to make a positive difference in your world. Please follow the podcast and share it with anyone who will find it helpful. Until next time, keep striving for positive change and greatness for all women.